everybody, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about MeshForge version 1.2, the static mesh update. MeshForge version 1.2.0 introduces support for static meshes. So today we're going to be looking over where those changes occurred, and we're going to be looking at the new Topology Splitter window. Let's go ahead and get started by opening up Tools, MeshForge, and Splitter. Okay, so you may have noticed that a couple things have changed. First and foremost, there's a new tab at the top that shows static mesh. So we're going to go ahead and start by clicking on that. They're going to take our object that's in the scene and we're going to drag and drop it in the field here and press load mesh data. So it works very similarly to the splitter tool with skin meshes. Obviously, this time we're just working with static meshes instead. So we'll start by opening up the settings tab. I took all the settings that were kind of laid out along the entire window and put it all in one convenient place under a drop down. So now you should be able to access all the settings you want from here. So you might notice that there's a new setting called triangle handles the offset. And all that does is it basically sets the triangle that's drawn to the screen further or closer to the actual mesh. For a quick demonstration, you can see here our triangles are drawn, and when I slide it back, it pushes the triangles into the mesh, and when I slide it forward, it pushes the triangles away. It just allows for more control over where those triangles are being drawn, so you have an easier time when you're actually trying to select the triangle. I'm going to go ahead and set mine to right about here, and I'm going to turn this off for now. And the same as before, we're just going to create a boundary. So as you can see here, this boundary is going to be at the base of the object I want to separate. And I'm going to then plant some seeds up here at the top. Go ahead and process. And let's see what happens when I press process and complete. Nope, that went too far. Let's see what it actually processed though. Okay, so it ended up processing the entire top part, which I'm not looking to do. I just want that. So I'll go ahead and go to previous state, go back up here, and we'll do some manual processing now. Okay, let's go ahead and press separate parts and save. See, does it create a enable that all the groups and I'm just going to go ahead and reset my window. It'll get rid of the preview and the same. And we're going to take a look at the prefabs. So what it does is it'll create a few different prefabs. It'll create one that has all of the prefabs from the original objects and do that together. Because I have prefab ungrouped objects selected in my settings, it'll also prefab this that wasn't in a group as well as this by itself. And then here. So now that I have my little TV sign looking thing here, you can see that there's actually a gap in the mesh at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is close out the splitter tool. I'm going to go back to tools, go to MeshForge, and open up the gap filler. And same thing as the splitter tool. You'll see that there's an additional tab called static mesh. So we'll click on that. You can drop this down to see all the settings. So there's two ways you can do this. You can either select on the prefab in the asset folder, Or you can do what I'm about to do, which is just select on the prefab in the scene. Once you select on it, it'll create a preview. So now all we got to do is, I'm going to start by filling in this gap here at the bottom. And to do something a little bit more interesting, I'll add a second group here, make it convex, add a small offset to it. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and just bring in the exponent value a little bit, update the prefab. And as you can see here, we have almost what looks like a television screen running some ads. So kind of interesting. I'm going to go ahead and finalize this. And once it's finalized, we'll go to the gap filler folder. And you'll see here under static prefabs, that we do indeed have our newly created static mesh prefab. Okay, so for the next part, I want to go over the topology splitter. I'm going to hit on as much as I think is appropriate for this video. I won't go into all the nuanced use cases, but I will show a couple of primary use cases that I think most people will end up using. So to start, we're going to go ahead and go into Tools, Mesh Forge, and then Topology Splitter. And I'm not going to show you an entire breakdown of every setting, just because you can look at the manual and see that it's in there. If you don't own this product yet and you still want to look at the manual, you can download it on my website, carryforgestudio.com. So I'm going to bring in an object. I like using large objects just to show what this tool is capable of. You don't have to drag it into the scene. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to. I'm dragging it directly from my project folder into the field here in the window. You're going to click on Split Mesh Preview. And as you can see here, you're going to have access to viewing the entirety of the mesh with its triangles. So similar to the normal splitter tool, the triangles do get divided up by group, but you don't have to actually paint individual triangles with this tool. If you open up the ungroup preview parts, you'll see that these are all our parts that belong to this object. Just in case you get lost in the scene, you can click on this and it'll bring you right back to your object and all of its ungrouped parts. Under settings, by the looks of it, everything here is in its default. Okay, so there are a couple of things to think about before you start using the topology splitter, and that is, how do you want your parts to be split up? Are you aiming to separate an individual part or maybe only a few parts from the mesh? Or are you looking to separate all of the parts so that you can do things like create a object that can, be blown to pieces. And so it's important to pay attention to what settings you're using. For instance, if I turn off save meshes, I won't be able to prefab anything. And that's because meshes are required. If you're going to make a prefabbed object that requires a mesh, you need to have that mesh saved. If it's not available, then you're essentially saving a prefab container with no actual mesh on it. And so this could be useful here if you want to create a scene-specific instance of a breakable object. So just by turning this off, I'll leave everything else as is. I don't even need to add anything to a group or nothing. If I just click Finalize Mesh, you'll see here that it has all of the data it needs, including a shell mesh. This is basically just an instance that's scene specific. But you'll also notice that this isn't a prefab. But this can be useful if you want to, create a destructible object, but you don't want to fill up your folders with prefabs and meshes. Then you could do it this way. And as you see here, the reason it fills it up so quickly, like for instance, this is split into 40 pieces. There's some objects that are easily split into 300, 400, 500 pieces. It really just depends on what gets determined as an individual object on the mesh. Okay, so if we take a closer look real quick at what we actually ended up doing, you can see here that I didn't add a secondary material, so everything that is capped is using the primary material. It's trying to make this seamless anchor to the surrounding texture. However, it's not perfect, but it does its best. Okay. Let's go ahead and delete that. Now we're going to choose Save Mesh, and we're not going to prefab all individual parts here. Again, that's very simply, do I want every single part that is created to be prefabbed? So here, if I split the mesh preview again, I'll be given this same object back. Now, how do we create groups? Well, all I have to do, I can single select or multi-select any object in the hierarchy of the object and click this Add Selected to New Group button. It'll immediately color and add it to the new group, so you'll be able to see what objects belong to what group. If I open up groups, you'll see that group right here. You'll see all of its parts. If you go under settings, you'll be able to do things like change the color, add a secondary material. This is only used if you were capping your object. You can merge the group, and you can draw the triangle. So if I turn this off, it simply stops drawing in that group. It could be useful for keeping yourself organized on what you're working with. Maybe you want to group like objects together. You can kind of see which ones are like, and you can select those ones and move them into a new group. Okay, so merge group. What this does here is all of those objects in green will become a singular mesh again. They'll still maintain their position, but they'll become a singular mesh. And so this way it reduces draw calls, but also, maybe there's just certain parts that you don't want to be objects that are individual parts. So you can do that with the merge group. There's a couple other buttons here. So if I click on a new part, I can add that to the selected group like this. If I go under the group, because when I added the group, it automatically grouped it in a container here in the hierarchy, I can actually select on these parts that are in the hierarchy, and I can either remove them or add them to a new group. So I'm going to go ahead and remove them. And as you can see, they're removed, and they're back up in the normal hierarchy list here. and outside of the group container. Okay. Let's go ahead and add a secondary material to these guys here. So this group will use this secondary material. Everything that's ungrouped will use the default material that's attached to the actual original object. So when I click Finalize Mesh here, I'm going to get a prefab container, meaning this high-level container here will be prefab. So everything inside of it does not need to be prefabbed in order for it to be usable across scenes. As long as all the meshes are being saved, that's all we really need. Those parts don't need to be individually prefabbed unless we want them to be individually prefabbed. So let's go ahead and finalize. It'll create our finalized object here. It'll sort it by groups and then ungroup parts. If I click on this, I can move everything that belongs to that group. Each part is still individual because we didn't merge the group this time. But if I look at the actual group itself, you can see here that's using the secondary material, whereas other objects are not using the secondary material. All right, so that's another use case. Another big use case, the one thing you could do is you can turn off prefab main container. You can turn off allow ungrouped parts to be used during finalization. Leave save meshes on and turn on prefab all individual parts. So what does this actually mean? This means anything that's not in a group will not be prefabbed or finalized. So it'll actually just be completely removed from the final product. We'll still create meshes for anything that isn't removed, meaning only objects that are in groups. We're not going to create a main container, meaning if I look into my prefab folder here, you can see that this main container exists and all the parts exist underneath it. You won't have this main container anymore. Prefabbing all individual parts essentially just means anything that's in a group will be prefabbed. So this allows us to do some interesting stuff where if we want to just save specific objects from the mesh, but we don't want to save anything else. And the reason this might make the splitter obsolete in some ways is because it is much faster than hand drawing, hand painting individual objects and removing them from a mesh or separating them from a mesh. We could say, all right, what objects do I like? Oh, by the way, you don't have to select in the hierarchy. You can actually select in the scene as well. So let's say I want to save this smokestack. I can select it. I can add it to a new group. And then I can finalize my mesh. And there we go. So in the scene specific version, you're still going to get your example built into a containing hierarchy. And that's just because that's how it's supposed to be for organization purposes. But if you open up your prefabs, you'll see that the only thing that was actually saved was this. So you can pull it out and it's an individual object now. So now you have an individual smokestack that you can use as an object elsewhere. Okay, so that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching and take care.